Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, a homeowner association neighbor broke into my backyard to deliver citations while I was in my pool. I am not even part of this HOA. Let's dive right into the video. The title story starts like this. A few years ago, I started toying with the idea of installing a pool in my backyard. I wanted a place where I could privately relax and enjoy some blissful solitude. It took months and months to figure out exactly how to do it and how to pay for it, and then that stretched into years when it came to organizing the actual structure. All this is to say that I spent a lot of time and money trying to make my own little private paradise in my backyard. And I should point out that it was a little larger than average. I'm not being euphemistic here, it wasn't gigantic, just slightly larger than the typical backyard pool. And I know because I spent dozens of hours poring over different designs and styles, as well as examining a few local examples belonging to some acquaintances of mine. Now this may seem like a non sequitur, but once I did get everything installed and working properly, I started inviting a few friends over here and there. Not too many, but I did occasionally end up having a few guests over for prolonged periods, which meant there were 2 or even 3 cars in my driveway. Not out on the street, just in my private driveway. If you think that these seem like very mundane minor details that couldn't possibly be responsible for much outrage, well, then I'm very much inclined to agree. However, one of my distant neighbors happened to disagree very strongly. One day when I was just relaxing in my pool alone and trying to take my mind off work, I heard the sound of my gate being forced open, which involved quite a bit of clanging and banging. Before I even had a chance to get out of the pool and panic about anything like home invaders, a woman stalked out of my side yard, clearly the culprit of the little break-in. Honestly, I was stunned more than anything else by her appearance, if nothing else. She was smartly dressed as if she had just come home from some kind of business meeting, and she was primarily holding a clipboard in her hand. In other words, the last thing you would ever expect to see if you heard someone breaking into your yard. It felt even more surreal because I had definitely never seen this woman before, but she came right up to the edge of the pool, not stopping to say hello, introduce herself, apologize, or anything of the sort. I watched in morbid fascination as she took some of the papers on her clipboard, put them in some sort of waterproof bag. After a few seconds looking over the ground in disgust, she picked up the net I used to clean the pool, dropped her waterproof papers in, and shoved them towards me as I continued to float in my pool. By the way, just in case you've never tried it before, it's rather hard to read fine print through a waterproof bag and a net when one is bobbing in water. While I was struggling with that, the lady in question introduced herself as the HOA president. She gave her name too, but just to be on the safe side, let's call her Karen. Anywho, this had me a little confused, mainly because I was not actually part of an HOA, and as far as I knew, there wasn't one in my neighborhood at all. As such, I was more than a little stunned when she went on to explain that the HOA hands a property over, but that I was still responsible for making the neighborhood look ugly and lowering their property values. At that point, I stopped trying to figure out what was in those papers she gave me, because I was quite sure she was about to repeat them in painstaking detail anyway. I could not even come up with anything to say, because how do you respond to someone saying you need to follow the rules of an HOA that you don't even belong to? Indeed though, she went on to tell me exactly what I was doing wrong, how it was ruining the neighborhood. Specifically, my pool was grotesquely large, in spite of just being a little longer and wider than an average in-ground pool, and that I was not allowed to have 3 cars parked in my driveway. I almost laughed out loud when I heard that one. Naturally, I politely told her that I was not actually part of her HOA. At this point, I figured that maybe she was just very confused and overwhelmed by some other problems in her life, so she had gotten things twisted around, but no, she just doubled down and told me that the rules also applied to houses bordering the HOA properties. I was downright flabbergasted. It was the most insane thing I'd ever heard, but she did not let me get a word in edgewise. She just got angrier and angrier, raising her voice even though I was stunned silent already. She went on and on about eyesores, lowering community standards, etc. And when I finally found my voice again, I said the only thing I really could. That I obviously was not part of the HOA, that they had no authority over me, and this whole situation was insane. I'm sure you can guess what happened next. She threatened to call the city and report me for code violations. I guess that was also supposed to carry the implied threat of a lawsuit. In any event, as calmly as I could, I said that she could go right ahead and tell the city whatever she wanted. I just spent a lot of money installing this pool and there's just no way I was gonna have it rebuilt because she was on a power trip. As you also might be able to guess, that did not calm her down one bit and she kept right on ranting and raving as well. I tried to change things up after that, asking if she could cite the exact HOA rules that I was violating. Oh boy, that really set her off. She sputtered and blustered, saying that it was obvious and that all the violations were in the stack of papers that she had unceremoniously shoved at me in the pool. I reasonably pointed out that I couldn't exactly read those in their current state, but I would be much obliged if she could just tell me exactly which rule I needed to read up on when I went inside. Before she had a chance to reply to that, I then politely asked if she had asked anyone for permission before coming onto my property. It took a moment for the implication to sink in, but I was not done yet. I kept my tone mildly curious as I asked how she had managed to get through my gate. It had sounded an awful lot like someone had forced the lock open to get back here, but surely she would have never damaged my property, right? My goodness, her eyes were bugging right out of my head when I let that hang in the air for a few deliciously long seconds. I was just trying to help, she managed to force out, whatever that meant, and so I just repeated that I was not part of her stupid HOA, hoping that would be enough to make her turn tail, leave, and never bother me again. In retrospect, I'm not sure if there's anything I could have said to defuse the situation at that point. Oh sure, she did indeed turn and flee back through my damaged gate, but she was mumbling to herself about how she would look into it and that this was not over yet. Unfortunately, this did kind of spoil the whole relaxation aspect of hanging out in the pool, so I headed inside and decided to do a little checking just to make sure that I was not about to get blindsided with something even more ridiculous. I looked up a few numbers for my city government, made a few phone calls before I finally managed to reach the appropriate department, and then I got a solid confirmation that nothing about my pool or driveway was in violation of any code. They actually sounded like they were laughing a bit on the other end of the line, as if they were expecting this to be some sort of prank because my question seemed so obvious. Of course, you can have 3 cars in your driveway, why wouldn't you be able to? Well, with all that out of the way, I figured I was in the clear and that Karen would just go nurse her bruised ego. What a fool I was! Not even a week later, I received what looked like a very official certified letter in the mail. She had actually gone to the effort of sending it out from the mailbox we share so it could get picked up, taken to the post office and then brought right back here to get delivered to me. The letter itself was some sort of formal complaint, covered in seals and signatures that looked awfully fancy. It claimed to be from Karen's HOA, but I got the distinct impression that she was the only one who really cared enough to put this thing together. Anyway, the complaint itself asserted that my pool violated some sort of setback rule that I'd never heard of before. That did give me pause, because if the rule did exist, then maybe I really had messed up when arranging for my pool installation. But then I remembered that I was not even part of this HOA, and she was claiming that I was in violation because my property just bordered other properties that did belong to the HOA. She also said that she'd be willing to withdraw the complaint if I reduced the size of my pool, emphasizing that this was a generous offer on her part and that she could just report me to the city whenever she wanted. That was the last straw, and I was done playing nice. I called off work the next day and spent it looking up property lawyers in my city. Once I found a man that seemed to understand my case and how silly it was, I made an in-person appointment as soon as possible. Let me tell you, I cannot remember a more satisfying hour of my life than when I met up with the lawyer and showed him the HOA complaint. It took him about 5 minutes flat to find the exact setback rule she was referring to, and just for a moment I was terrified that she might be right. But then my lawyer grinned and pointed out that this law is actually not on the books. It was never properly recorded. In fact, it was essentially just a proposal that had been forgotten years ago, never implemented or enforced in any capacity. From there, I had 2 options. I could pay my lawyer for time well spent, ignore everything Karen was trying to pull, and get on with my life, or I could get down in the muck with her and file a countersuit for harassment, frivolous litigation, and damage to my gate lock. I think you can guess which one I picked. Part of me was hoping that we might get a drawn-out, protracted legal battle that might actually end up in a courtroom, but reality was even more satisfying. Mere days after my lawyer finished and sent notice of our countersuit, the HOA and Karen completely folded. They instantly got back to us, essentially begging us to drop the matter and pretend like it had never happened. They even went so far as to complain that the legal fees alone might bankrupt the HOA and degrade the entire neighborhood. I was more than willing to accept their surrender, under a few conditions of course. Firstly, I said that I couldn't possibly feel at ease as long as the current HOA president, a certain Karen, remained in her position. Once again, they got back to us immediately, promising that she had been removed. It was clear that they hoped that would be enough to make me back off, but I was not done yet. I took a few days to plan and prepare my evidence for the next step. I then found out the time and date of the very next HOA meeting and attended. True to their word, Karen was not actually there and seemed to be taking an extended vacation. I waited until the session was nearly over when they opened the floor to anyone who wanted to bring up any issues. At that point, I stood and presented a carefully chosen list of mild issues with the way the HOA currently operated. Nothing incendiary enough to ruffle feathers yet, but I also took care to ensure that the issues were mainly caused by policies implemented by Karen herself. I took great pains to highlight how overly strict rules could actually be counterproductive and ultimately lower property values instead of increasing them. I offered a few alternatives along the way, different ways that dues might be reinvested to lift up the whole neighborhood, such as beautifying the park or organizing special events. I took especially delight in comparing the costs of cleaning up the park versus retaining a lawyer to make frivolous threats to people who were not even part of the HOA or paying to replace expensive locks that were broken by overzealous HOA presidents. It was an immensely satisfying evening, and I even ended up making a few real friends there. Karen never did show her face there again, and I enjoyed myself immensely in sending her several insistent letters asking her to pay for the damaged lock. When she finally did send a check, I ended up pinning it to the wall near my desk just so I could enjoy the sweet taste of victory over and over again. And the next one is titled Malicious HOA Compliance. So we've always had an incompetent HOA, but they leave me alone. It's not that expensive, so we have lived in harmony. That changed 48 hours ago. I think in all the years I've been a part of this, I got one actual invoice for our yearly dues. I know when they are due, and I know the amount, so I've always paid at the beginning of the year. I'm not entirely sure when the actual date they are due by is, however, I pay in January or February and have never been harassed. The same goes for this year. I paid about a week ago. Early yesterday, I thought I received notice of intent for them to file a lien on the place. Strange, because I paid. So I emailed them and they claimed it was because they didn't have my contact info they had just received. About a month before they were gonna send out invoices, they requested new contact info for some law change in Colorado. I responded to that with the new info, then they sent the invoices before receiving the new info. I don't understand the incompetence, but whatever. Over the next few emails, the secretary basically told me every way which I was wrong despite her sending the invoice 15 days late to an address that was incorrect and I was 34 days late, based on her not receiving my payment. So she sent the notice again, even though I had paid. She did no wrong here, the facts were I sent the notice, I updated my contact info as requested, and she is just incompetent. Since my email had changed, she cut off my access to the HOA website where I previously paid, so now I was gonna have to rely on them physically mailing me a bill. Okay, I can play that game. What she didn't realize is I don't actually live in the United States, so I updated my contact info for a third time, this time to my actual mailing address, and then removed my email so in the future any correspondence can happen via regular mail. It costs about $70 to send me mail here and takes about 1 to 3 months to get to me. You better believe next year I'll pay the invoice when I receive it and not a day earlier. Once I receive the letter of what I owe, I'm happy to pay. That's all I ask for. Until then, they cannot put a lien on my property. Hopefully, this can help someone fight back. And the next one is another fantastic malicious compliance story. It starts like this. Back before cell phones and TSA checkpoints, I was working as an admin assistant. Ray was my department head and had a great sense of humor. When I was hired on, Ray made sure I understood that I worked for him even though I would do some office-wide work, he was still my boss. Clint was in charge of another department in our office, and flying from our office to a satellite office for a day or two was common for people in both departments, and I was in charge of making standard pre-approved travel arrangements. If someone needed to change unexpectedly, they were supposed to handle those themselves. Clint seemed unable to understand that. At some point, Clint decided that he wanted to cut travel costs. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate for his department. Lowest possible fares were always the 5 AM outbound and 11 PM return flights. Clint did not care though. A couple weeks into this policy, Clint is too headed to the satellite office for some in-person meetings. Game on. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Clint left on the 5 a.m. flight. The lowest rate car rental company didn't keep their cars available at the airport, so then Clint had to take the shuttle to their off-site location to pick up his car. Sadly for Clint, the shuttle didn't start running until 8, when his first meeting was scheduled to start. Oops, the client refused to reschedule that day, but agreed to the next morning. At some point, it dawned on Clint that he either had to fly home and back or get a room for the night. He then chose to get a room and of course call me. One lowest possible rate room coming up. Unsurprisingly, that room did not have security on site like he was used to. It did have little multi-legged friends, if his complaints were true. The next morning, Clint headed out in the previous day's suit, only to discover that his car had been broken into overnight. The police took their time arriving, and by the time they were done, Clint had missed his meeting again. Somehow, Clint got the client to reschedule again, and he decided to take the flight home and back the next day. Of course, I was kind enough to remember the lowest possible fare rule, so Clint was booked on the 11 p.m. flight home and 5 a.m. return, even though his meeting was midday. This time the lowest rate car was at the airport, so Clint got to skip the shuttle. Sigh, you cannot win them all. At that point, Clint's lowest possible policy had already cost the company at least double what a normal trip would have, not to mention all the time I had spent calling hotels, motels and car rental companies. The next day, he is on the 5 a.m. flight and makes it to his meeting. I don't know when he realized that he didn't want the lowest possible fare at 11 p.m, but I do know that he decided to take the more expensive earlier flight home both days. Somehow he discovered that he could change that himself. The next time I saw Clint, he tried to fire me, but too bad, I worked for Ray, who knew and laughed about the whole thing. Clint was furious, but there wasn't anything he could do. The company would back Ray, and Ray was backing me. Clint changed the room rate policy because of his experience, but refused to rescind the lowest fare and lowest rental rate policy. Well, that was until accounting let slip that not only had Clint figured out how to take the higher priced earlier flight, he actually figured out an upgraded seat as well. Clint found himself with an entire department intentionally missing their 5 a.m. flights and rebooking for the more expensive 8 a.m. ones, which somehow only had upgraded seats available every single time. Rental car reservations were missed and more expensive cars were rented. Meetings that were previously in the office were somehow only available after hours. So clients were taken to dinner, and dinner included alcohol, so rooms were booked at hotels closest to the restaurants. And of course, returning flights scheduled for the next day. Less than a month later, all lowest price policies were rescinded, I was allowed to book normally again, and the missed flights, upgraded seats and fancy hotels disappeared. Dinner meetings remained, but decreased dramatically. When I left, Clint's reputation still had not recovered. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Parking revenge for real. So I live in a very large apartment complex. I believe there are around 900 apartments. The majority of parking spots are first come first serve. If you work odd hours or get home late, you will have to park near the mailboxes and walk to your apartment, and it can be a pretty long walk, half a mile. When you sign the lease, you get the option to pay extra and get an assigned parking spot. One-bedroom apartments can have 2 paid spots, and 2-bedroom apartments can have up to 4. When I moved in, we paid for 2 spots as I work a split shift, so half the week I am not home until midnight and half the week I get home around 6:30. There are signs in front of each spot saying if you're not paying for said spot, you will be towed. The spots are also numbered if it matters. We had no issues for almost 3 years. However, during the pandemic, I got a promotion and a company car. My roommate changed jobs also, and they gave her a company car as her job has her driving to nearby states. As luck would have it, 2 spots directly next to the ones we already own came open, so we purchased them. So when you get a paid spot, you have to provide proof of license registration and your plates. If anyone else parks in your spot, you have to call and okay it. The maintenance staff are known to check cars randomly, and the cop who lives on site likes to tag cars for towing. The residents have to call a dedicated number, leave the information, and the apartments call the tow truck. So we have 4 spots and 4 cars. My roommate was going out of town and decided to get her personal vehicle worked on. So when she left town, it meant 2 of our spots sat empty. Then someone tried to steal my car, so I had to take it into the shop. So then my work vehicle is a very large SUV, so when we have spaces open, I park parallel in 2 of the spots since we pay for them. I came home from work, parked my SUV parallel and went to bed. I woke up, walked the dog, and noticed someone had stuck a sticker saying to stop blocking 2 spots, and there was a random car parked in the 4th spot. I personally don't mind if people accidentally park in our spots, and I leave a note explaining the spot they're in is reserved along with the spots numbers 7, 8 and 9, and please don't park there again. Then went to work and the car was gone. Came home and the same car was in spot number 7. I parked next to them and once again explained that the spot is reserved and next time I will ask the apartment to tow them. Again, I went to work and came home and the same car was parked parallel in spots 8 and 9. So the way the spots are set up, every 4 spots have a concrete curb with grass on it. The way he parked his rear bumper was touching the concrete curb. I parked in my spot but as close to his car as I could. I don't use my passenger side door, so I don't need access to it. I was off the next day and was supposed to get my daily driver out of the shop. I then get up around lunch and check outside and the car is still blocked. I once again tell them to not park in my spots. I then move my car over 1 spot so they can get out and get a ride to get my car. I go do some errands, get food, go see a movie, etc. I get home around 11 PM and the car is still parked in my spot. The letter I wrote was shredded and on the ground, and on my work car was a letter telling me off as I don't deserve the spots. So here is my revenge. I parked my personal car where my work car was, right next to his, and put an old trail camera on the pole near the spot. I had another 4 days until my roommate was home, so for the next 3 days I did not move my car. On day 3, apparently they tried to call a tow truck to move my car. The tow truck pulled up, looked at the spots and then left. On day 4, I called the apartments and had him towed. I hope he did not need his car for 3 days. And yes, the car has not been in my spots since a few days. Edit, the trail camera was in case the person damaged my car in rage or being stupid. Also, the person who parked in my spot was driving a newer Honda. It was not overly expensive, but definitely newer than my car. My work SUV is a 2022. In addition, I want to explain how parking is since I have 4 cars. So the apartments are a series of giant U inlets with free parking along the inside of the U and paid spots along the walls. So paid spots are not bordering or taking front spots from those who cannot pay. The next one is titled, "Never mess with me or you will regret it." This tale was told to me as a warning when I started on my first post-college job. I am relating it exactly as it was told to me. This occurred in the early 80s, so those of you who have grown up with the internet may not understand how we did things in the olden days. There were no smartphone apps to show Q codes for airline tickets. They were made out of paper with red carbon mess. Reservations were done by phone, it was primitive by today's standards. Players, names have been changed of course, Sandra, super sweet secretary loved by all, True, I worked with her, she was amazing, Fred, Sandra's boss, and Tom, the local VP. Also there was Big Shot, the incoming manager from back east, and Al, the lead engineer on the team. This whole story occurred in Salt Lake City, which if you don't know, family was a huge part of the culture. Even at work, family matters took precedence and local management knew this and allowed for it. And well, Big Shot's office minions in another corporate location noticed some slight irregularities in time cards like days off without pre-approved vacation requests. So he got himself transferred to the Salt Lake City office to straighten things out. He was pushy and naturally he was quickly hated. Big Shot ended up as a middle manager between Tom at the top and Fred. One morning, Sandra got a call from her daughter who was unexpectedly in town and wanted to have lunch. Naturally, Fred and Tom gave her the okay. Big Shot did not like that though, and although it wasn't explained why, maybe it was not by the book, maybe he was upset that Sandra went over his head. In any case, he decided to stick his nose in, but rather than just say no, he dropped the last-minute urgent travel request on Sandra's desk and it had to be done because he expected to fly out that afternoon. Sandra was heartbroken that she wouldn't get to see her daughter, but she had her work responsibilities stopping by to drop off some paperwork, and Al noticed that Sandra looked a little down, which was a huge change from her normal chipper mood. He naturally asked why, and Sandra explained. Al told her, he had no authority by the way, to go have lunch and we will take care of it. Big Shot got his travel packet, got on the plane that afternoon and flew off to his meeting. That's when things started to go wrong. The rental car reservation was invalid and there were no cars available at any of the agencies. All had a hold on them pending confirmation from some clients. So Big Shot ended up getting a rent-a-wreck. For those too young or not in the US, there really was a discount auto rental agency by that name. Quality was not their #1 concern. When Big Shot got to the hotel, he found that his reservation was no good. He had to wait around until after the tentative reservations expired, which was after 6 p.m. Getting suspicious, Big Shot looked at his tickets and found they were one way. He had no flight home. To say Big Shot was incensed was probably an understatement. The next morning, Tom flew in to join him and he gave Big Shot a packet that was marked extremely urgent that had been left on his desk with a note to take it to Big Shot. It was Big Shot's return ticket. On the way back, Big Shot detoured by the corporate head office and got a very senior executive to come with him because of some very serious personal problems. The next morning, Big Shot led the senior executive and Tom into a meeting with all of Fred's department and began publicly berating Sandra for incompetence and so on. When he got to the part about the tickets, Fred interrupted and told the senior executive that Sandra could not have done that. She was on approved time off having lunch with her daughter. This raised the senior executive's eyebrows and got Big Shot even angrier. The senior executive said if Sarah did not mess up the tickets, then who did? Fred stepped forward and then Al. And one by one, every single member of Fred's team stepped forward to take responsibility to protect Sandra from Big Shot's wrath. Tom and the senior executive knew instantly what happened. Everyone on Fred's team had burned up the phones making tentative reservations for rental cars and hotel rooms, leaving Big Shot stuck with a one-way ticket, worthless reservations and no alternatives. Within the hour, Big Shot's desk was empty and his badge had been turned in. It was never explained if Big Shot was fired or if he was just quickly relocated. The senior executive though stuck around to get to know the team. He was very impressed with how the whole team stuck together and protected their own. After he finished telling me the tale, the engineer said bluntly, "Don't mess with Sarah. We love her and we will make you pay if you upset her." Message received loud and clear. As I worked with Fred's team, I got to understand why everyone loved Sandra. She was an absolute gem in the organization, efficient, super friendly, just an all-around wonderful person. Addendum, I appreciate all the kind words and awards. However, I want to clarify a point or two. Note, everything is from what I was told because I was not there, so I apologize for any possible incorrect inferences I have made from the tale. From what was said, Big Shot was not well liked. He had a strict by the book mentality and was a bully. Tom and Fred had told Sandra it was okay to take a long lunch with her daughter. Big Shot did not like that because it didn't meet the weak advance approval policy. Just a guess, but it's possible he got his panties in a bunch because the request went over his head too. He could not stop Sandra, but he could bully her and make her miss the lunch meeting because he did not like the informality of approval in the SLC branch. He might have intended to demonstrate that HE was Fred's superior and people needed to get his approval and possibly to instill a little fear. It did not work out so well for him. Addendum 2, some of the respondents apparently are not reading the comments, so let me clarify for those who want to be a contrarian or a jackass. From the way I was told the story, Big Shot was not removed from his job for doing his job. Sandra had permission from Big Shot's boss, and that's explained in several comments below. His job did not include authority to override his boss's decision. He was removed for trying to bully Sandra, who she had permission. He was simply not doing his job. Before we end the video, I will read a story from r/malicious compliance that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "You Want Me to Ask Every Customer?" Okay, so I was once failed by a secret shopper about 30 years ago when I worked at a, now gone, New England convenience store/deli chain. I was the only person in the store stocking, ringing and working the deli. I was also acting ASM without pay or title but all the responsibility doing inventory and making orders. I was failed for not asking a secret shopper if they wanted anything from behind the counter, aka tobacco, lottery and various high theft health and beauty items. My boss told me I needed to offer every customer something from behind the counter, no matter who. They didn't care what I offered. I said no problem. I went back to work and the boss went into his office. My very next customer was a local priest buying bread. As I rang him up, I asked if he was all set. He said he was. I asked if he was sure that he did not need any lottery tickets or condoms. If he did not get lucky with one, he may with the other. He turned red and said he was fine, quickly paid and left. My boss yelled from the office that I was now exempt from having to push items from behind the counter. I knew I would never get fired because of all the stuff I did that was above my pay grade while trying to make a good impression. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.